ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning, that's more like it. My name is Edward Perry. I'm the Global Climate Change Coordinator at BirdLife International, which is a global partnership of national conservation organizations working to conserve nature for the benefit of biodiversity and people. I'm delighted to welcome you all here today to this event looking at the role of land, forest and other ecosystems in delivering on the Paris Agreement. Now I know it's Saturday and a lot of other events that you could have been at today, so it's great to see so many faces. And I can assure you we have an excellent lineup here of panelists. We have first Kate Dooley from the University of Melbourne, Ana Cecilia Conde Alvarez from Mexico, and then we move to Indonesia, the Zoological Society of London, and the local government Regional Development Planning Agency in Sumatra. So this event is co-organized by the Rainforest Foundation Norway, RFN, and ZSL, the Zoological Society of London. Before we move to the panelists, I'd just like to reflect a little bit on where we are and provide just a bit of context to the presentations you're to hear today. The adoption of the Paris Agreement last year was historic. It was a great success in multilateralism that saw governments commit to hold global average temperature rise below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. Governments also adopted a global goal on adaptation. Now, forests and other ecosystems have a critical role to play in delivering on both the mitigation goal and in helping local vulnerable communities adapt to the impacts of climate change, which we've already seen today. The land sector, agriculture, forestry and other land use, accounts for about 25%, 24% of human greenhouse gas emissions. And the land sector is unique in that our mitigation actions in the land sector can be both reducing emissions, for example, by stopping deforestation, or by removing carbon from the atmosphere, by restoring ecosystems. The important role that forests and other ecosystems like wetlands play in addressing climate change was very much recognized in the Paris Agreement. Countries have also recognized it within their INDCs, their intended nationally determined contributions, with about 80% of NDCs including reference to the land sector. But as we all know, we are not on a pathway to 2 degrees, let alone 1.5 degrees. And if you actually add up, aggregate all these INDCs, the sum of that ambition, should those mitigation actions be implemented, would probably put us on a pathway closer to 3 degrees Celsius. So we've got a lot of work to do to ramp up our ambition, our mitigation ambition. And forests and other ecosystems have a critical role to play in doing that. Restoring and conserving existing natural ecosystems can provide what we need in terms of closing that mitigation gap and also provide a range of other benefits for biodiversity and communities dependent on ecosystems. So today, we're going to reflect on what the potential role is of forests and other ecosystems in delivering on the Paris Agreement, and also take account of some of the potential risks of actions in the land sector. So if we do not take rapid action to restore and conserve ecosystems now, we become increasingly reliant on bioenergy and carbon capture and storage and other negative emission technologies. Now, these are riddled with uncertainty, and they also threaten to compromise the principles outlined in the Paris Agreement, such as ensuring ecological integrity and protecting biodiversity, food security, and human rights. So with that, I'll leave you with our esteemed guests here, our panelists, who are going to talk a little bit about the potential of the land sector in delivering on Paris Agreement, some of the potential risks involved, and share best practices and insights from the field. So we'll start with Kate Dawley, an expert in land use. Then we'll move down to a national level in Mexico before looking at a more localized example in Indonesia. So I have the pleasure to invite Kate Dawley to share with us a recent report on the role of forest and land in addressing the Paris Agreement.
Thanks, Edward. Is my presentation going to come up? While you're doing that, I can start. So I'm going to give a sort of a big picture overview here of the contribution in particular of forests to a 1.5 pathway. Okay, and can you hear me better? Okay, I'll have this closer. So there was a whole bunch of text on this slide. It's not there now, never mind. It's like that, yeah, sorry. I was going to say it's text you're all familiar with anyway, Article 2 and Article 4 of the Paris Agreement. I just wanted to start, Edward has sort of already given us an overview of this, but emphasizing that 2 degrees is not the goal in the Paris Agreement. We have well below 2 degrees and going towards 1.5 degrees. And the reason for that is, in part, the structured expert dialogue, which came out of the 2013 to 2015 review, essentially a review of the science, showed that 2 degrees is far too dangerous to be considered as an upper limit or an upper guardrail for warming. So the whole 2 degree thing that we've worked with for years in this process is really off the table. 2 degrees is dangerous, far more dangerous warming than could at all be accepted. And even 1.5 degrees is very dangerous for a lot of vulnerable the most vulnerable countries and communities. So really what Paris has done is put 1.5 on the table and highlight the urgency of achieving these temperature limits. The other thing that really came out of Paris, so that was Article 2. In Article 4, the long-term goal is the language around balancing sources, essentially balancing sources and sinks. So balancing anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sinks in the second half of this century. Now, that doesn't mean by the end of the century at all. This is to be taken in light of the best available science. So the science sort of tells us when we would have to balance emissions and removals to be on a pathway for well below 2 and 1.5 degrees. But what Article 4 has done is really put land use front and center, because it's talking about removals by sinks as a key part of the mitigation goal. This is very different to the Kyoto Protocol, where land use was seen as a distraction, as an add-on at the last minute, and the focus was on reducing emissions from fossil fuel use, reducing industrial emissions. So this is good in some ways, because land is definitely part of the solution. Land and forests are a key part of the solution, and we won't get to 1.5 degrees without stopping deforestation and addressing agriculture, which drives deforestation, but also emissions from agriculture. But we also won't get to 1 point. The mitigation we can achieve through the land sector is limited. It's not infinite, it's finite. It's defined by biogeophysical processes, which I'll explain a little bit more of. So it does, whilst it's not in this language says nothing about this, at what point you stop fossil fuel emissions, how quickly they have to reduce, what is the scale of removals. It's not said in this language, but there is a limit to the scale of removals, and that defines how quickly we need to reduce emissions. So that's a little bit what I will explore more in this presentation. There's been a big contribution from the climate modelling community to future mitigation pathways. And as you'll see, the main thing you need to see in this graph, don't worry too much about lines going everywhere, is zero. We have a line across, a horizontal line, which is zero, that's zero emissions. And so you can see for a below 1.5 degree pathway, in particular, but for all pathways to some degree, emissions go to zero and then they keep going down. That's been called negative emissions, and so there's a big debate now about negative emissions, how could they be achieved, and are they necessary? I think and it comes back to what I said before, the scale of the removals, so the scale to which these lines go below zero, is dependent on how quickly they go down to zero to start with, and so that's really key. So in most of these, most of what's been put forward from the modelling community, emissions don't really peak until after 2020, the late 20s, getting towards 2030. And then we're relying on really large volumes of negative emissions in the second half of the century. So peaking before 2020 would obviously limit the reliance on negative emissions. Now, some of the issues with negative emissions, what I'm presenting here comes from a recent paper done with the Stockholm Environment Institute, which used a risk framework to analyze the impacts of negative emissions and what would be feasible. So the questions that we asked were, how much could feasibly be achieved? What scale of negative emissions could feasibly be achieved? So we're looking just at sort of biophysical and resource input constraints. And then the second question, the second sort of risk here, is what are the impacts of this? So so we've got what could feasibly be achieved, and then what could be achieved with acceptable social and environmental impacts. And so obviously this is not a question of science necessarily, we have to define what's acceptable, but I think the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement itself give us a good indication of other global objectives that we also have to meet. So negative emissions can't be at the expense of food security, at the expense of sustainable development or poverty eradication. These are all goals that are still on the table. So that's what we defined as acceptable impacts, not compromising those other goals. There's also a third risk that remains across the board. So any reliance on carbon removal is going to be prone to reversal. So even if we achieve the feasible level of negative emissions within socially and environmentally acceptable impacts, they still could be lost back to the atmosphere. And there's also another aspect of reversal, which is relying on negative emissions means temperatures go up higher and then come back down. It's called temperature overshoot. And so the climate impacts of that temperature overshoot may prove irreversible. The science is not really very clear on what are the risks of going higher above 1.5 and coming back down. So that's the less that we breach those temperature limits, the better, obviously. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, known as BECCS. This is by and far and away the largest, the main way of achieving negative emissions that is put forward in climate models. It relies on large scale of bioenergy supply. And so we mostly, in this report, what we've done is assess the feasibility of that level of bioenergy supply. We haven't looked at CCS side of it. There's other research and people looking on the CCS side, but that we do think that the scale of bioenergy supply is the key limiting factor in achieving large scales of negative emissions via BECCS. So some of the constraints on that bioenergy supply are essentially what's called net primary production, which is the rate of plant growth, and the expected supply of bioenergy just for negative emissions. And bear in mind that we have lots of other aspects of climate policy which are expecting bioenergy as an input. such as aviation, which can't then be used to achieve negative emissions. It doesn't double up. So the expected scale of bioenergy supply is often far exceeds net primary production. So it's just not a scale of plant growth that could be achieved in a year. This is on an annual basis. The sort of much more mid-level, a range that we see in a lot of the literature is around 250 or 180 exajoules a year from primary bioenergy supply, which would essentially represent a doubling of global human harvest of biomass. So all feed, fiber, timber, everything we currently harvest, the scale of bioenergy at the mid-level range it's the same scale. So we would need to double our harvest of biomass, which the scale alone suggests negative impacts, but also resource constraints in terms of available land, water, and nutrients. So on the nutrient side, nitrogen is already a serious environmental problem. We've already essentially crossed what's been termed as planetary boundaries of our use of nitrogen. Like we're something like 10 times beyond what the planet could actually cope with in terms of how much nitrogen we're drawing down and using. So the sort of scaled up use of bioenergy that is being proposed is not feasible from that point of view, not feasible from a water input point of view, or necessarily land. And I'll talk a little bit more about land. One of the key uncertainties, and there's very large uncertainties around feasible and sustainable levels of bioenergy supply. And I would say that in the literature, the inputs to the debate range from zero, scientists suggesting that the feasible scale of bioenergy from dedicated land use is zero, up to around 1,000 exajoules a year. So really huge range and a lot of uncertainty. And one of the key uncertainties is land availability. A lot of the estimates that expect very large amounts of land for bioenergy is because they're trying to avoid impacting on food security by using degraded land, potentially unused or abandoned land. And there's a lot of debate around whether that land is available for this sort of use, or whether it's already being used for, say, customary agricultural purposes, like shifting agriculture. So the availability of land is an unknown. And in terms of prioritizing food security, the recommendation from a report from World Resources Institute is that we should use zero use of dedicated land for bioenergy, which leaves waste and residues as our only supply of bioenergy, which is far more limited in scale. To the degree that whether waste and residue sourced bioenergy could be used for BECCS, I'm not sure. That would require more research, I think, and would be an interesting area to research, because it's more difficult to the logistics of that are more difficult and the scale is much smaller, but it would be interesting to see what that potential is. So moving a bit more quickly, an alternative to BECCS to achieve negative emissions is forest and ecosystem restoration. The scale of this is significant. What we did is look at literature that calculated the optimal scale of sequestration that could be achieved if deforestation was halted and natural forests were left to regenerate. It's a large number, and we actually took less than half of that number, assuming that not all forests can be left to regenerate, because we have shifting agriculture, traditional uses of forests, some commercial uses. So even with only half of that estimate, we achieve a carbon drawdown from forests that is enough to meet the lower end of the expected reliance on negative emissions. So we put these numbers together. That lower end of the expected reliance is 370 to 480 gigatons of CO2. You can see we've put zero negative emissions from BECCS. So the message here is that through protecting and restoring forests, we could achieve the carbon removals that are needed at the lower end of the scale. So that implies the most ambitious mitigation in fossil fuels and industrial sources that can be achieved. And we've also, it's worth looking at landscape restoration and soil carbon, but the quantification of that is very difficult. So we've left that out of a quantified number. So I think the key conclusions here is that halting tropical forest loss is is the first step to achieving this carbon drawdown. I haven't had time to go into it properly, but another proposed way of achieving negative emissions is through large-scale forest plantations. But again, that competes with other land uses, and the amount of sequestration is not as great from a forest plantation as from allowing a natural forest to regenerate. The carbon density there is much higher, and so the potential for mitigation is much higher, and that's why natural forests should be a priority action area for climate mitigation. But of course, you can't allow forests to regenerate if you're still logging them. So this is really about halting deforestation, allowing forests to regenerate. And then we have, and this is what you'll hear from the rest of the panel, lessons from forest initiatives that are happening in countries, national level initiatives like RED, projects on the ground that are giving a lot of lessons into the best way to achieve this. But certainly it's very clear that lack of land tenure, lack of clear collective tenure rights is a key driver to deforestation. And when there are secure tenure rights, we have much lower levels of deforestation and higher levels of biomass storage, carbon storage. Another really important point is that this idea of forest restoration as a way to achieve negative emissions, as a way to achieve carbon drawdown, is a one-off opportunity. The forest then has to stay there. The forest switches then from a sink, sequestering carbon, to a stock, and needs to be protected as a carbon stock. And this can't be done over and over on, like, there's only a certain amount of degraded forests to restore. It's a one-off opportunity this century that gets us on that 1.5 pathway. And doesn't represent a sort of, therefore doesn't justify ongoing fossil emissions, because it doesn't offset those emissions. It just pays back the land carbon debt, the carbon that had been lost from the land previously. Hence, we still need urgent and radical emission reductions to keep on a 1.5 pathway. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that work? Thank you very much, Kate Dooley, for that very interesting presentation with a number of very important messages coming through, from the importance of a 1.5 degree target, which is already going to be associated with impacts, through to the urgent need to cut emissions down now so we become less reliant on things like bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, with 3 risks very clearly outlined by Kate. And some final messages about the important need to restore forests and just to stop the cutting down of forests in the tropics. So thank you very much for that, Kate. I'm not going to take questions now. We're going to take them all at the end. So hold on to your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you as well. But we're just going to get through the panel presentations first. So after that very good global overview, we're now going to move and look at what that might mean for a national government. So Ana Cecilia from Mexico she works at the National Institute of Ecology and Climate Change, where she is the General Coordinator of Climate Change Adaptation. So today she's going to share her experience and insights from incorporating the land sector into Mexico's climate change response. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And can you put my presentation? Yeah. But I could go over yours. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about national and subnational and local experiences that might be helpful for the discussion at the end. I'm going to rush to, basically, we have this territorial approach. We work on basins or watersheds visions. So we don't see water or soils or agriculture as sectors. We try to make a territorial analysis. And for adaptation, we have this way to ecosystem-based adaptation is fundamental. We submitted in our national our NDCs, and community-based adaptation and risk reduction, disaster risk reduction. So there are 3 components of our approach for adaptation. And we also, of course, are looking in every step for the adaptation actions to see if we contribute to mitigate There must be interinstitutional collaboration, meaning not only environment, but also the water minister and so, as you see. And we have the three levels of government. It's national, at the state level and local level. It's very important to include all the three levels of government to achieve adaptation actions. This is one I really enjoy. I think looking at a territorial approach, you can see that we have compromises on climate change on the UNFCCC, but also there's the CBD, where all countries have also to communicate, and you are all welcome next month to be in Cancun. It's a beautiful place for the CBD convention. And we'll also have this reduction of soil degradation and desertification. And there's more complex issues like food security, where the World Summit on Food Security is also part of the UN. So we all have global objectives, but at the local level, you don't see only climate or biodiversity or the certification and role or food security. There's everything. If you want to act, to make adaptation actions, you have to include all the factors. This is, well, it has only already the I, but it's our national determined contribution now. And I put in red what you might be seeing, where we are trying to accomplish on our projects. Yes, we have to reduce the most 50% of the most vulnerable. That's 2020, 2030. I'm sorry. And there's the watershed um, compromises and risk reduction, ecological connectivity, RED, and so on. So, as a background, we have regional climate change scenarios. We share it with Central America and the Caribbean. They're free. You can download it on that web page. But after you have the regional climate change scenarios, what do you do when you want to analyze, let's say, at a basin level? So we make those interpolations considering the height. The more high is the surface or the basin, the more increment on temperature, as you can see. And you can put that scenario into potential impact models as SWEEP or SWAT or whatever. And we are working now on developing the 1.5 global temperature. What would this imply in Mexico and in our territories? We haven't finished, but I think we will have it by the next year because it's a politically important scenario, climate change scenario. And also, we have been working, as I promised in Paris in the IUCN meeting, we have been working on what would happen to the vegetation or ecological zones. It's a group, it's been, we have reduced as bioclimatic zones, so we can work on that. So that's the, let's say, the base scenario. And this is, if you gather 6 models, where the more red, the more coincidence of models that saying you're going to have negative impacts. We are also work with our friends from in the convention to combat desertification, and we have worked on this aridity index, and you can see under several scenarios what would happen. And we are working now on integrating those informations, climate, vegetations, and soils, in what we call a national atlas of vulnerability to climate change. The research was done with the support of Canada and UNDP. We are also working on what would happen with the national protected areas. They will move, or we have to be sure that those could move. So this is another interesting study. And because my friend here works with birds, I put some results for the Mexican islands and what would happen and what would be the species. We work with 20 species, islands, and those, well, I leave the presentation, of course, but those are only index or studies that point out potential impacts. If you want vulnerability, meaning people, you have to have climate exposure index, sensitivity index, and adaptive capacity index. And then the adaptive capacity index, there's an intervention or political intervention, possible policies that you could make to reduce vulnerability now and on the future. So it's horrible slide because you cannot see anything, but there we have extreme events and possible disasters. Then it's the part of sensibility where we introduce potential impacts, and those are the capacity, adaptive capacity indices, human capital, social capital, and so on. So potential impacts is what I just show you. So we have to, in our adaptation projects, we try to intervene to do something about the capital of a capacity building. Well, this is an example on agriculture, just to tell you, introducing all those elements in a map, you could see where for rain-fed agriculture, maize agriculture, we could find the most vulnerable, the hotspots, let's say, of vulnerability now. And this is the way now the National Atlas is going on. And as I tell you, we want this to make an instrument for decision making. You can change variables. What about if we take all the vegetation out of Mexico? Who's the most vulnerable now? Where vulnerability will increase? And now I'll make examples at a national level. We're working with those six other institutions in the interagency coordination platform, and we have characterized the wetlands and to try to prioritize if we have money, where would allocate it. So, and this is interesting because you see the most vulnerable that I show you yesterday on the other slides, intersected where more disasters, natural disasters, hurricanes and floods have occurred. So mainly the message is, if you invest now in your wetlands, you will reduce the risks. That's the point. And that's the Minister of Environment has presented the month ago, and we're going to work using that kind of maps for decision making. So in this example, I think we show an instrument to support decision making, ecosystem-based adaptation. We describe the wetlands and where they are and extension and so on. So, and also synergies with mitigation. If you lose your wetlands, mangroves, and so on, you have the risk of emitting all what's called blue carbon. So it's an important message that has to be attached to this kind of results. We also have wetlands and climate change at a regional and local level. This is an example, a project that ended on October, but we work with the communities, restoring wetlands and coral reefs, and also it's called palafitos. There are houses on posts. So when a flood comes in the state of Tabasco, people can have a place to storage their small animals and papers and so. And we also make harvest of water so people can have pure water to drink. This is now managed by women in the communities because it's very important. It was very important to involve women in this action. Well, this is accountability, is not ended. How much carbon sequestration could be kept in mangroves and in wetlands in general. And there's an attribute that we call reversibility. There's a road that was constructed at the half of a mangrove, and you can see to your right that the mangrove cannot be restored. We're working on that, but it's not easy. If you affect the mangrove, then it would be very difficult to restore it. In this example, I think you can see the three approaches: EBA, ecosystem-based adaptation, community-based adaptation, and risk reduction. And it includes reversibility and credibility, because I think we have involved the best scientists in the country, but also equity. Women are involved. People, communities have decided which adaptation actions must be done. And also, I think it's clear that there are synergies between mitigation and adaptation. And the current, we are working now, we started a project, that GEF project, that also involves coastal watersheds at the regional and local level. This is the approach. Of course, it's a basin, so you do adaptation actions, but you look if what are the implications of doing actions on the upper basin, middle basin, and at the coastline. So there are six watersheds involved in the Gulf of Mexico, and mainly is that we think there's great synergies and that could be involved in this project. We're looking explicitly to them. It's called C6, Cuencas Costeras en el Contexto de Cambio Climático. So there's 6 Cs in our project, and there are 29 local projects being developed with honey producers, coffee producers, water quality, and so on. So I think we are still working on that, on this project, but I think has explicit objectives of doing synergies between mitigation and adaptation, and with the 3 approaches. Well, this one I love to present it. It's something we created when I was a lead author in the last report of the IPCC. We think that the world has now some limits, as you say, the thresholds that could be affected, not only because climate change, and we are on the space of policies here in the COP, and we are making decisions that could drive us to a higher resilience world, or a very low resilient and high risk world. So you can find it in chapter 1 of the working group 2. But I think it shows what we are trying to do with our policies, and hopefully here at the COP. So thank you.
Muchas gracias. I particularly like the slide on the birds. Thank you. Nice touch. So again, a great presentation with some key messages, particularly around the importance of synergies. So ecosystems and ecosystem-based approaches are going to be critical, as Kate outlined earlier, to actually address the 1.5 target, but also to build the resilience of our natural systems and of the communities that depend on them. So we saw synergies at a national level between the different conventions. So really thinking in the context of sustainable development goals, biodiversity objectives, climate change objectives, and great demonstration of how that can actually be planned in a coherent, consistent way. And then also at the local level, working with communities through community-based and ecosystem-based approaches to bring that together. So a particular focus on the blue carbon and resilience side of things there as well. Thank you very much for that. We will now move from a national level to look a little bit more subnationally in Sumatra, an island in Indonesia. And we are going to do a triple act. So I'll just introduce you to the 3 speakers, and then they might be able to just run from one to the other during the presentation. So first I'd like to welcome Damayanti Bokori, Director for the Kilola Sindang project for the Zoological Society of London. Damayanti is also a professor of entomology and biological control at the Bogor Agricultural University. We'll then hear from Bonnie Dewantara, Biophysical Data and MER System Manager for Kilola Sindang, again this project at the Zoological Society of London. And then the third speaker will be Walima Ustini, thank you, Regional Development Planning Agency, Bapeda in South Sumatra. So over to you, thank you very much. I'll just load your presentation.
Thank you. Please allow me to stand here because I'd like to use the laser, and it's hard to turn around if I sit down. So thank you very much. Thank you for being here. My name is Dami. And we're going to present about the Sustainable Landscape Project. So if before the previous speakers have discussed more at the national level, we're going to straight down to discuss about what we are doing in Indonesia with respect to the Paris Agreement as an answer to Paris Agreement, and also on the ground we are currently developing. So the Paris Agreement, as has been said by Edward before, it's really a turning point for us. It's an opportunity for us to look at the new landscape and how we can address the climate policy in Indonesia. So therefore, the South Sumatra government, with the vision of the governor of South Sumatra, has come forward and decided that, okay, let us use South Sumatra as a model, because South Sumatra does not have a lot of forest anymore, but they still have remnants of forest. And therefore, this is a very good opportunity to show that Indonesia can reduce emission and at the same time also doing restoration and increase livelihood. So therefore, our project is called the Sustainable Landscape Management of Kelola Sendang. A little bit about Indonesia. We all know the challenges in Indonesia with respect to deforestation and forest degradation. And basically, it's about conflict because different people are living in the landscape and have different interests. And the sustainability of landscape has always had a very big challenge because there are sectoral approaches in managing the landscape. So coordination between land managers are very important. And therefore, our project is about partnership. Partnership at the landscape level in South Sumatra between public, private people to reduce greenhouse gas. And then if you ask about why partnership, why are we partnering with different institutions? Well, as said before, the conflict because of different interests. And then the multifunctionality of land itself means that Indonesia need to reconcile between the agriculture need, the conservation, and other competing land use. And of course, there are different characteristics and typology and the legal status of lands and multi-stakeholder approach, constant negotiation. It's time to do that. So the synergy of the agenda is one of the goal of this project. This is a picture of the of the governor of South Sumatra, Alex, Mr. Alex Nurdin. And so this project is funded by UK Aid and also Norwegian Embassy and the Packard Foundation, with a collaboration across institutions in Indonesia. That's Indonesia, and that is South Sumatra. And the project, our project, consists about 1.6 million hectares of land, where we have the national park here, the national park of Sembilan, and then there are remnants of forest here, the wildlife reserve is called the Dangku. So our project wants to maintain this leftover forest, and at the same time also, how can we develop corridor and maintain the integrity of the ecosystem. So we are working across 204 villages, and these are the number of households that are in the landscape. And this is the type of land that are in the landscape. So it's quite a big project. The strategy. Basically, our strategy is the first 2 years, we will be focusing on developing the enabling condition, which means developing the policy and institutional support, and also gathering all database and developing the monitoring system. And then we will be working with the community, with the private and also the public, the government on site, on site for the model of the different activities. Okay, so this is the last slide. Basically, this is what we are expecting, that our project will be able to have an output of a pilot model at the landscape level. And the outcome is actually public-private people partnership. And of course, the impact is hopefully we can have a reduction of the emission of greenhouse gas. And this is the objective of our project, which is called the Kelola Sendang. Okay, and the next presentation will be by Bonnie.
Kliknya yang atas apa yang bawah?
Thank you, Budami. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In technical aspect, I would like to present about the integrated sustainable landscape through village as a jurisdictional approach. In terms of bottom-up process beside top-down approach, Indonesia actually has their own regulation special about village, number 4 to 2014, and supported by government regulation, presidential decree, and this regulation actually directed to spatial planning, strategic environmental assessment, and national planning development system. Uh, Village as a jurisdictional approach, it is important to become a performance base for sustainable landscape management. This is actually the methodology how to define a village as a sustainable landscape management. Selected biophysical, social economic data will be processing in simple process with geoprocessing, and selected village we get was obtained by inclusively process conducted by stakeholders. Integrated sustainable landscape management and spatial planning framework actually part of the implementation intervention in Kelola Sendang project. All of data, existing data, and during the project, data is collected and stored in one map system. Collected in one map system. And capacity strengthening data support to one map system. Capacity strengthening data is conducted by stakeholders. Inclusively monitoring based system is feeding for monitoring, evaluation, reporting system, and also report MER system support to one map system. One map system actually for is a material for decision support system for spatial planning process. This is actually the illustration of integrated sustainable landscape and habitat corridor connectivity. And as you know that habitat corridor connectivity is a part of the sustainable landscape management. In this project, there will be capacity strengthening, private sector engagement, community empowerment, and government policy improve. In the context, at village scale, there will be reconciliation area, reconstruction, border conflict, promoting community forests, protecting riparian zone, and so on. Private sector engagement, mining, plantation, forest concession, there will be high conservation value, high carbon stock management area. At the landscape level, it looks like a stepping stone. This is a footprint of stepping stone among wildlife reserve and national park. This is the illustration from aerial photo. Engagement in concession area, high carbon conservation value, high carbon stock protection zone as a stepping stone for habitat corridor connectivity. And as the result, around 45 villages was defined for as a demonstration site for intervention activities, and can be measured as a performance base for sustainable landscape management. Thank you.
Okay, it's my time. Thanks for the time that you give to me, and thanks to moderator for Ibu Dami and Pak Boni. Let me introduce first. I'm Ibu Titin or Mualim Agustini from the South Sumatra government. I would like to tell you that we're in South Sumatra, Indonesia, has already have a green growth policy. And in line with this, in line with the landscape management, partnership, uh, biodiversity conservation, and one map policy. And in line with the green growth policy, we already have some success stories and plan, challenges, and also priorities. We already have a growth above 5% among the wealthiest province in Indonesia. We also have a free education for all South Sumatra people. And also our land right now has already a place to live of more than 200 main globally biodiverse. So that in the next 2018, in South Sumatra, especially in Palembang as the capital city of South Sumatra, we're gonna have to international event Asian Games 2008. And yeah, this is the challenges. 130,000 hectares primary forest has lost since 2005. And also the priorities we have protect peatland and forest and land fires that we have already make a tragedy in 2015 last year. Increase prosperity and also the priorities are about secure biodiversity. And this is the goal of our commitment. We have a goal so South Sumatra will achieve high development as well as protecting our environment. And the economic green growth as a solution, not a problem. This is the keys that we are all together, not only in South Sumatra, I think, but also in the whole world. Yes, economic growth is not a problem. It's also as a solution for all. And we also have initiating program and partnership. This is we call Collega Sumsel, and we also have defining green growth needs and linking restoration to a large-scale conservation vision and strategy. We develop a landscape management partnership, one map policy, peat restoration map, community business, and also biodiversity conservation, optimizing public-private people partnership as a pilot implementing. Okay, and here is the strategic plan. Um, we already mainstream this green growth policy in our regional medium-term development plan, or we call RPGMD, until 2018. It will continue next for next, not only until 2018. We have vision South Sumatra purpose, more advanced and international competitiveness with some vision, strategy, and priority. And we have to underline number 7 priority about the environmental management and disaster management. And we are also focused on 6 priority in this 7 priority, which are about reforestation and also greenhouse gas emission reduction. And this is the growth South Sumatra, and we can see that there is totally we have make a reduction for this critical land. And this is the boundary area where we already have a pilot project with the coordination between government, NGO, private, and include this also the area of ZSL Kalola Sendam. And defining of this green growth policy, we also have some activity such as one map policy, which are the priority is in peatland restoration and also biodiversity strategy. South Sumatra has become a place to some biodiversity. For example, tiger, Sumatran tiger, and also elephant, what Sumatran elephant. Yes, this is the location of where we are from, South Sumatra, Palembang. We are 23 hours from here, so that it's maybe one day you can come to Indonesia, especially see you in Bon Challenge 2017, February in Palembang, and also 18 Asian Games 2018 in South Sumatra and Palembang and also Jakarta. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Damayanti, Bonnie, no, not working. Hello. Yes. Thank you very much, Damayanti, Bonnie, and Moelima, for that very interesting expose of the work you're doing in South Sumatra. So firstly, the Kelola Sendang project, and then the green growth strategy that you are localizing in South Sumatra. So great to see again these different objectives coming together into a coordinated strategy, and also applying this landscape approach. So thinking spatially specific rather than sector specific, and bringing these issues together. So in many ways, actually reflecting some of the messages we heard earlier from Mexico as well. So thank you very much for sharing those best practices and experiences, and I hope you and the audience have learned something, have got some ideas to take back home. Now is the opportunity for you to get a word. So I'll open up. Oh, hands popping up already. This is great. Makes my job easy. So I'll open up for questions and comments. Please indicate whether it's a sort of a general question or comment that different people can respond to, or project specific, speaker specific.
Good morning. I'm John Honteley. I work for the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, organization that is setting standards for certifying forest and claims and labels for products from sustainable managed forest. I have two questions to Mr. Dooley. I read with interest the study that you talked about. I think it's a great study, and I hope it will make a difference about how much we can rely or not rely on negative emissions. But I have two questions. One is, you mentioned that for carbon capture and storage, you need to double the harvesting of biomass. And I question that. I know that carbon capture and storage is a very expensive and difficult technology. I don't support it, but I don't think that you need per se a doubling of biomass to apply it, because you can also apply it for smaller quantities. You have to do it in a centralized way, but I don't think you can say that you need doubling of biomass globally to apply this technology. The second question I have is forest restoration, which is the core of your alternative proposal. In your report, you already are careful by taking the lower expectations, because you also say that forest restoration can mean no harvesting. But what do you expect then in terms of not talking about biomass, but all kinds of other applications for wood? We will need much more wood in the future. We will need it for construction. We will need it to replace oil for bio-based products and so on. There will be an increased need. And how much will that, conflict with a pure forest restoration approach?
So I'll just collect, have you got those? Okay, yeah, I'll just collect one or two more questions.
Thank you. I'm Hasbi from the partnership in Indonesia. I have two questions. First one is for Mrs. Anna from Mexico. Thank you for your good presentations. As explained by Ms. Demi from Indonesia, we have a serious problem, I think, in the RED Plus implementations on the intersectoral coordinations and also coordinations between the central and local government. So I interested to know on your experience if you have best practices and how to improve the coordinations among sector and also to improve the coordinations between the central and local governments. We know that many local governments has different interests in the development. So it is very difficult to get the coordinations and synchronizations to get the to achieve the target in the RED Plus implementation. My second question is about the you explain in the implementation of RED Plus in Mexico. Also, you develop the approach to make the synchronizations and also combinations of the adaptations and mitigations. In my country, I know that it is developed in different processes. The documents for the mitigations different from the adaptations, and then it's separated and also led by different organizations, different institutions. So I would like to know how about your experience in developing the documents of the mitigations and adaptations, including how to implement in technically and of these two approach. Thank you.
You want one more over here? Oh. All right. Okay. Sorry. Yes. We've got one here. Sorry.
It'll be a quick one. So Andrew Lowe from Australia. Great to hear the good project in Indonesia set against the context of deforestation and peatland fires that occur there. It's a great integrated approach, appreciating biodiversity, and also great to see that it's supported by regional government there. My question is, are there other types of these initiatives springing up around Indonesia following your great lead?
I might just pause there. We will come to you. We've got plenty of time, and just ask panelists to respond to those initial questions. So the first two questions were directed to Kate. Do you want to respond? Sorry? For the same gentleman, sorry. So around the need for wood.
Oh, two questions from the first question. Yes, sorry. Yeah, okay, thanks for those questions. On the biomass doubling of current human harvest, so this is explained in a fair bit of detail in the report. I'll just summarize it quickly, but you can read it there. So there's a big range of estimates for the amount of bioenergy used for negative emissions. And obviously there's also a big range of the volume of negative emissions that we could achieve or would be used. So these are all ranges. The figure of 250 exajoules, this is all based on exajoules a year in order to compare it to net primary production. So the figure of 250 exajoules a year is equivalent to current human harvest of biomass. And that is a figure that is in a lot of climate models. By 2050 we're talking about. So there's a lot of literature that suggests that by 2050 we would be harvesting or producing 250 exajoules a year from biomass through dedicated use of land. Now there's lower figures in models, but I don't recall really seeing much lower than 180, maybe 150, in the hundreds. And there's much higher figures. There's actually 500, there's 1,000 exajoules a year considered, I think not specifically for BECCS, but for bioenergy as a renewable energy source, actually in a big UN report on renewable energy from about 2008, I forget the name. So that's the range. And we sort of came at the midpoint and said, look, and this has been produced in a lot of other literature, the midpoint here of 250 represents a doubling. In the IPCC recent report, the third assessment report, they suggested that above 100 exajoules a year, there's no consensus on whether that could be supplied sustainably. And then we have Tim Searchinger from WRI suggesting zero bioenergy from dedicated use of land. So that's kind of the ranges we're covering and where that comes from. On the other question, the use of timber, yeah, I mean, timber is a really important product, and we're not suggesting that timber shouldn't be used and paper shouldn't be used. This is ongoing. I think partly what this report's trying to do is flag up the big numbers and point to areas of further research. Obviously, I would suggest that timber needs to be increasingly sourced from current plantations, and what we're really talking about with stopping deforestation and regeneration is natural forests. And we go into some detail in the report about the difference, the potential for ecosystem restoration declines very quickly as the forest is degraded and as time passes. So it's really about highlighting priority areas that are priority for regeneration rather than timber harvest. And the other, I guess, quick implication of all of this is the scale of emission reductions that we're talking about would mean reduced consumption across all sectors, including the timber industry. So expansion of the timber industry into natural forests is not compatible with climate mitigation.
Thank you very much, Kate. Comprehensive response. Now we're moving to the question from the gentleman on REDD+ in Mexico. So it's about how can we actually get that intersectoral coordination that we need between REDD+, adaptation, and other objectives, and the coordination between the local and national level. And the specific question around that in the context of REDD+ and adaptation.
Yes.
Is that right?
Thank you. Very interesting question. Thank you for making it, because it's very important. Usually we have institutions like the Commission for the Biodiversity, Natural Resources, Water. So this is a great effort to coordinate between the Minister of, all of those are in the Minister of Environment. More difficult is to coordinate the three levels of government, because as our friends from Sumatra says, there's conflict and interest there. You have different interests that might enter in conflict. So that's the art of policy, I think, because it could conflict could be solved by violence or imposition, or conflict might be resolved doing policy, which is the hardest part of policies. Even though we have a bad opinion of policies in general in the world, I think policy, if it's useful, is for that exactly. So in the project I show, exactly we're trying to make what it is not in the Mexican law, but it's called intermunicipalities, organisms that decide. Municipalities in Mexico decide the use of land. They can change they could turn a mangrove into a hotel or for tourism or whatever. So it is very important that at a local municipality level, those authorities participate. Those are the first ones. And then the state, because we're the federal governments. So we cannot come to a state and say, you will do this and that, even though they're federal laws, of course. So this has been the hardest part of the integration between levels of government. It has been done in participative workshops. It has been done using the law. It has been done proposing new ways of creating, I won't say laws, but related to laws. We have to be creative and change the structure of governance, I think, because it's completely disaggregated. So this is a main part of the project. And considering adaptation and mitigation linkages is not easy. Mitigation, as you know, is the main issue for many climate change projects and policy making. And mitigation, I think, doesn't have the scope of being seen in a territorial way. You can say, why don't you put 3 plants of energy here, or even a nuclear station or to produce, and you never hear the answer, where are you going to put your nuclear plant? They just say, in accountability, if I produce energy with 2 nuclear plants, then I will don't emit, and then I will have this. But nobody wants a nuclear plant in the territory. So, but we are struggling exactly. Don't mitigate if you don't think on adaptation. And the examples I show is the other way around. We are implementing adaptation actions, and we are saying, and I can prove you that I'm also mitigating because, as you say, it is seen like two different, like even two conventions. No, you go to the room of adaptation or to mitigation. No, but we need them to be to these synergies to be created. One urban example that I didn't mention here is black carbon. If you see our INDC, our inventory, we have black carbon, and black carbon contributes to the increase of global temperature, but it's a problem for health of people and ecosystems. So Mexico says, yes, we want to reduce global temperature reducing black carbon now, today. So I think that's an excellent example between mitigation and adaptation also. Thank you.
Thank you, and great response to a very good question. So how do we get that coordination? And there's some great experience there in Mexico between sectors, but perhaps still some challenges for that vertical integration. Interestingly, earlier in this week, there was an event on ecosystem-based adaptation. And so coming from the adaptation perspective, and the key message coming out there was also, hey, look, we're almost creating a silo here. We have people working on REDD+, people working on ecosystem-based adaptation, all doing very similar assessments, and then we're getting stakeholder fatigue. You know, these assessments you could actually have one assessment that serves multiple purposes. You could have common monitoring frameworks. I think the experience in Mexico is a very valuable one. And now I'd like to turn to our colleagues in Indonesia to give you a chance to respond either to that point or to the specific question on whether there are other types of initiatives popping up in Indonesia that reflect the approach you have taken.
Thank you very much for the question. And fortunately, the answer is yes. There are other types of projects that are springing up in different parts of Indonesia. For instance, in Papua and also in West Kalimantan, a lot of projects are also looking at the landscape approach. So I guess it's a new thing now in Indonesia, or it's people understand now that if we want to overcome this issue of sustainability, we need to coordinate across sectors. Especially in South Sumatra, there are several projects that are already ongoing at the same time, like from IDH. IDH has a landscape approach also in some part of our Kelola Sendang landscape. And then also Belantara Foundation is also doing that. So there are many types of similar projects springing up in the country overall.
Great, we'll take a question from this gentleman here, and then got two more in the back.
Hello, I'm Norman Brewer from Paraguay. We have a similar project to the Indonesian project. Thank you very much for your presentation. I like the teamwork on that. My question is specifically about the corridors, which we're also trying to link about 100,000 hectares of fragments with each other. And I'd like to come sort of like on the ground question. How are you actually doing this? I suppose, except for the riparian, a lot of them run through people's farms. So how are you doing the work with the local people to establish these corridors? And related to that, are you looking for ecologically functional corridors? Or are these just sort of physical delimited spaces that people recognize as corridors and through which animals and other genes can eventually be transported? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ashankiwa is my name. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana. Thanks to the panelists. My question goes to Kate. The conclusion that you've drawn, your concentration on the tropical forest, its restoration and its effort in hitting the 1.5 target for the Paris Agreement. Looking at finding out from you what happens to the marginal land, the adjoining land, the farmlands. You know, working with the communities is just a question of survival. It's a question of getting food on the table. And so if we over-concentrate on restoring tropical forests and forgetting about their farmlands, what happens is that they will come back, if their farmlands are degraded, they will come back and encroach on the restored forest. We have a project, we try to restore the riparian vegetation of the White Volta River in Ghana. And we realized that as we're concentrating on protecting the riparian vegetation or the buffer zone of the river, farmers, the smallholder farmer whose survival depends on the soil, still want to encroach on the buffer zone. And then we quickly had to introduce these sustainable land and water management interventions on their farms, improve upon soil fertility, and eventually that is what has saved the riparian vegetation that we have set out to do under the project. Thank you very much.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Claire Fyson from Climate Analytics. I also have a question for Kate, more about the kind of the big numbers. So thank you for your report. I think it's really interesting. My concern is that, so you said that you could have up to 480 gigatons of carbon dioxide removal through regeneration of forests and reducing deforestation, which is obviously great. But as you said, it's a one-off solution. And if you look at 1.5 scenarios at the moment, by 2100, we need to have sequestered between 450 and 1,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So obviously there's still potentially a very big gap that we need to address. And that is even with doing everything that we can to decarbonize other sectors. So I'm just a bit concerned that we're maybe closing the door on other options such as BECCS. And perhaps we need to think more about a portfolio of options. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we'll take a break there and then. Oh, sorry, have you got one more? No. One more question and then we'll.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name is Sumaya Omar from Forestry in Sudan. Thank you for so informative presentations. To be short, I would like to congratulate the initiatives that have been developed for sustainable landscape and restoring of forests and to reduce the greenhouse gases. My question is that after drawing or after developing such initiatives so as to bring together the private, community, and the government sectors to restore the forest, how to sustain this initiative in accordance with the land tenure and the restoration of this land as community land, of the government land, or the private sector land. And to what extent you have succeeded to draw the attention of the communities to participate in these initiatives by giving them incentives in accordance with the carbon credits and to enable them to enter the global carbon market. Thank you very much.
Sorry, and that was directed to our colleagues from Indonesia. Is that correct? Yeah. Great. So I think we might slightly change the order to these questions. So starting with Kate, the two questions directed to you. One about the numbers and whether we're closing the door on BECCS. And then another one about the marginal land and what happens to communities coming back when there's been restoration initiatives.
I'll try and be very brief. These could be long discussions, but we're running out of time. So to give the other panelists time. In terms of communities, I mean, this is everything I'm saying here and in this report is like a very global level. So I'm not coming down. There's obviously different drivers at local levels differ in different countries and places and contexts. But we do know across the board that something like 80% of the drivers to deforestation are agriculture, and that tends to be industrial agriculture. So we're not really talking about communities driving deforestation, and we're also talking about because in the report, and I didn't mention in my presentation, we have some level of reforestation as well as restoration, which are quite different. But in both cases, we need to be looking at community-based reforestation. For forest protection and restoration, we need to be looking at securing land tenure, collective land tenure of Indigenous peoples, but as well local communities. So I think the very broad answer to your question is that communities need to be at the heart of these solutions, and their rights and needs need to be at the heart of these solutions. And what we're trying to tackle really are the large-scale industrial drivers to deforestation. On the numbers, so yeah, the Rogelj report, which is what we based our analysis on in terms of the numbers, it does have 450 to 1,000 gigatons carbon withdrawals by the end of the century, and we came to slightly below that. No, we came up to 480. So I think it was something like one third or one quarter, I'd have to look in the report, of 1.5 degree scenarios could be met at that lower level. So what we're essentially suggesting is beyond the lower levels of expected removals, it's not going to be feasible to achieve more. So very much the message here is that we need to limit the amount we assume we can remove, and that will change the mitigation pathways in the near term. In the next 10 years in particular, need to be steeper than the ones that assume 1,000 gigatons of removals later in the century. And I can't entirely exactly remember, but I did think Climate Analytics' last report had 500 gigatons carbon removal, so coming down to lower levels, which is, I think, where we need to go.
Thanks, Kate. So emphasis on the early mitigation there. And also coming back to the forest question, so I think that you actually made a very strong case for what our next two speakers were talking about, which is having a more of an integrated approach, thinking about the different sustainable development objectives, thinking about putting local communities at the heart of that. So yes, absolutely, very good question. And now I'd like to turn to colleagues from South Sumatra for your two questions, so around the corridors and around tenure and carbon credits.
Yeah, thank you, Edward. I think I can combine two questions directly. What we have been done is actually management corridor, and not all of the riparian zone can be managed because we know that it is difficult. A lot of paddy field tends to located in riparian zone, especially in Indonesia at least. And we have managed this actually management corridor by stepping stone. So that's why in terms of village selection, we should get the remaining forest and riparian zone and still have the forested area in that location. So and Indonesia actually there is a mandatory regulation to protect the riparian zone. Small river is around 50 meters and big river is around 100 meters. Then it is mandatory, and some of because of the geographic condition, it is more than 100 meters. So in terms of the village selection, we get the ship to obtain the ship from village area to another village. That can be a stepping stone for corridor connectivity from one to another area, conservation area. In my case, is a national park and wildlife reserve, and the northern park is the restoration ecosystem. And in the village area, we do community awareness, and then participatory mapping to get a mix to ensure the access of farmer, and also income generation. Because of this area, there are a lot of wide area of seasonal flooding. So because of flooding season, they move to the forest and so on. So we're trying to get the suitability analysis for species tolerant for the flooding. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. quick intervention?
No,
We'll
it's
wrap up.
there's a question from the student.
Okay.
The last question hasn't been answered.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Just yeah. You were asking about the tenure and carbon initiative. Actually, we haven't gone there yet. Yeah. So carbon initiative and whether community are we going about toward that direction? We haven't been thinking about that because carbon market is still a shaky thing in Indonesia. So we're trying not to go into that. But your question about the sustainability, how can this project be sustained? I think the government, the South Sumatra government will answer for that, the sustainability of the project.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but it's from Sudan, right? I think you asked about how to make this initiative can get sustained. I think we're in South Sumatra government has already have a commitment, and fortunately, uh, our governor has a strong commitment to make this green growth policy stand on the right track so that we all, from the leadership of our governor, we translate it into policy and into the law, into the structural, also about the document. We all make this all grab it together and try to build the structural as a team to synergize and coordinating the program so that this initiative can be sustained and can run on the right track. I think that's all.
Thank you very much, Moilima. Now we are having to draw this event to a close, but I'm sure many of the speakers will be hanging around afterwards, as there are coffee and tea and other goodies outside. Just before we do, I just want to very quickly sum up today's session. So it's really been a broad scope. We've started high, looking at what the implications of Paris are for forests and land, and the role that forest and land can play. An emphasis on the fact that we need to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's undebatable. We're already seeing impacts. And that to do that, we need to ramp up ambition earlier rather than delaying. And we can do that by investing in restoration and conservation of natural forests. And that will reduce our reliance on technologies that are perhaps slightly uncertain or might have impacts on food security. And then we've just seen afterwards at the national and local level some really good examples of how you can bring these different objectives together and coordinate on the ground to make sure you're getting both your mitigation and adaptation benefits through sustainable land management and putting communities at the front of that. So I'd like to thank you all very much for attending this on this Saturday morning. And please do carry on any discussions outside. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Can you take a picture?
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much. I have to run now, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Take a picture first.
Okay.
He doesn't have time for pictures.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, yes.